So is this background kind of what it looks like by you guys?
Yeah, everything's starting to bloom.
I love those pink, purple cherry blossoms.
Yep.
I can hear the birds chirping by you.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's always so loud with like just the birds and stuff.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
But I love it.
Yep. Hi, Laura.
Did it freeze? It was doing the.
Yeah, it froze.
Okay, so we'll try this again, and
okay,
we'll just go with that. So. Okay. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for having me here. As Brian so kindly introduced me, my name is Laura Neville, and I work at St. Michael's College in Vermont. I'm one of the career education coaches there. And today we're going to be talking about interviewing and professional dress. So just a little bit about me here at St. Mike's. As a career coach, I specialize in areas related to education, human services, government law, and we got some background music too. So I tend to specialize in these certain career areas like education, human services, government law, and environmental fields, and certain academic departments related to that, but I do work with all students and alumni in different interest areas. And then just personally, I am someone who loves the outdoors. I love sports. I spend as much free time as I can outside. So I really appreciate a lot of what you're doing at the Cystic Fibrosis Lifestyle Foundation. And again, appreciate being here today. So to start out talking about interviewing and professional dress, these are really just two components of a full application process. And anytime you are applying for an opportunity, you have your resume, your cover letter, then maybe you're interviewing and how you're dressing. And this is really a holistic package. And the overall goal is to communicate your value for a specific opportunity. So that might be through writing, it might be verbally, and it might be how you present yourself. We communicate in a lot of different ways, but if you're always thinking about communicating your value for a specific opportunity, and there are three pieces there: being able to communicate, being able to identify your value, and always tailoring that to a specific opportunity. So we're going to be thinking about those three things as we move through this. So today, again, we're talking specifically about interviewing and professional dress. So from an interviewing standpoint, we're going to be moving through how you prepare for it, which is actually the majority of an interview. It actually happens mostly beforehand. The interview itself is often just about 20 minutes long. So some best practices and strategies. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about appropriate professional dress. So as I just mentioned, when you are getting ready to interview, one, be proud of yourself. If you've gotten to the interview stage, they like you, they've invited you in, so you should feel confident about that. And now you need to prepare. So that means starting and actually going backwards and looking at the job description, thinking about how the skills you have match what they are looking for. So again, that's thinking about this specific opportunity. Maybe do some research on the company or the organization, go to that website, talk to some other people who've worked there or have a connection there, go on LinkedIn, do some background reading on the people who might be interviewing you. You want to know as much about that organization as you can. And that is both to prepare for the interview, but it's also for your own sake. You want to know that this is going to be a good match for you. Then you want to start anticipating some questions. And this is going to be both questions that they might have for you, and then where next going to talk about questions that you might have for them. But starting with the questions they're going to have for you. Most interviews today are called behavioral interviews, which means they are looking at your past behavior to have a sense of how you might act or how you might be an employee for them going forward. So they're going to be asking you questions about situations where you might have dealt with a challenge or where you've taken on a leadership role. They will ask for examples or situations. They might present you with a possibility and ask you to think through how you would solve that or what you would do in that situation. So you can never know exactly what they'll ask you, but you can have a sense of what type of thing they might ask you. And there are some strategies for how to prepare for that. So as I said, likely questions are going to be about situations. And the way to answer it is by giving concrete examples and actions you took. So this is a strategy that I actually was given by an alum from our college who works in human resources. And she said, anytime you are answering a question, if you can think about a situation that you had, an action you took, and what the outcome was, that will give them a really concrete way of understanding how you contributed in that situation. So, for example, if they asked you, can you tell me about a time that you resolved conflict? You might think about a time, and it doesn't have to be in a work situation. It could be in your personal life. It could be at work. It could be in a club or on a team or some sort of community involvement, sometime where you've dealt with conflict. So you would give them an example of a situation. I was working as a server in my job at a restaurant, and a customer, complained about something. So then what's the action you took? I remained calm and professional and went to my manager and reported the situation. Then what was the outcome? So by answering in that way, you've just given a very clear answer. You can think about group projects you might have worked on, any situation that might be relevant. Next, you want to be thinking about questions that you might have for the interviewer, because the last question they are always going to ask you after you go through the interview is, do you have any questions for us? And this is where that background research is really going to help, because you might want to ask a question about something that the organization has done recently. Maybe they've been in the news. You could ask about what a typical day looks like. A great question is always to ask the interviewer what their motivation is to work at the company or the organization. It's that personal connection. So think through some different questions to have those prepared. And you always want to have at least 5, because during the interview, they may answer your questions. So then you get to this piece about, well, no matter how many how many questions I've prepared for, no matter how many examples I've thought of, and you've written down all your possible answers, there's always things that might go wrong, right? It's always still unpredictable. And maybe you get anxious, maybe you get nervous. And I'm going to say here, if you get nervous, that's okay. It means you care about it, right? Anyone that tells me they don't get nervous before an interview makes me a little bit worried. Maybe you should care a little bit more. Some people are naturally a little better at it. And over time, the more you practice, the more interviews you do, it will get more comfortable, but it's okay to be nervous. That said, there are some strategies that you can implement that are going to help you be more comfortable and that you can utilize during the interview. So 1, think about strategies to deal with anxiety and stress that you might use in a different situation. So if you listen to music before something, if you do breathing exercises, make sure you get a good night's sleep, go for a walk. go ahead and use those to just calm yourself down ahead of time. Now, during the interview, smile, take a deep breath, sit up straight. You'll notice that if you can do those things, even just smiling, you'll actually breathe a little more and you'll calm yourself down, and it puts the interviewer at ease as well. Now, if you can't think of an answer to something, that's fine. Maybe say, well, that's a great question, and then try and talk through an answer. There really aren't always right or wrong answers in an interview. They're interested in seeing how you think through something, right? What your style is. We need all sorts of different employees. So one person might have a certain answer, someone else might have a different answer. They're looking at what your thought process is, what your style is, what your strengths are. So if you don't know the answer to something, feel free to talk out loud. Show them your thought process. If they give you a situation that you haven't encountered before, you can say, I can imagine a situation where I would do this. You can always ask if you can come back to a question. I'd be careful with that because then you have to make sure you come back and answer it. But these are all strategies you can use. Just remember that, again, the interview itself is a stressful situation and they're looking to see how you handle that situation. So if you can remain calm, if you can smile, if you can maintain eye contact, that will say a lot. So I just mentioned eye contact. So that leads into our nonverbals. Obviously, the content is really important. You do want to practice what you're going to say. Think through those examples that you might use. And at the same time, your confidence, your body language, those are all things that say just as much as the words. So we're going to be talking later about your appearance and what you might wear, but also be thinking about your posture, your eye contact, whether you're smiling, your facial expressions, the tone of your voice. Some of these things we may not realize how they're coming across. So you can practice by having someone else, do a Skype session, have someone sit across from you and give you feedback about that. Then there are some external considerations that you might also want to take into account. Again, appearance we'll be getting to. The interview structure. Are there going to be multiple people interviewing you? Maybe if it's an in-person interview, do you want to bring a portfolio to put your extra resume in, the questions you've prepared? If you're someone who takes notes, that's okay. Just let the interviewer know that you're going to be taking notes, and only do that if you can maintain eye contact. But a nice folder or portfolio is a good thing to bring. Again, if we're returning to possibly some in-person interviews, think about how long it'll take you to get there, weather, timing. So all these considerations. Now, I do want to talk briefly about virtual interviewing versus in-person interviewing, because really the majority of interviews in today's day and age are virtual and are likely to remain virtual. That really started after the recession, when employers realized that it's less expensive to do virtual interviewing, it's effective, it's flexible, and our technology is improving. So you may encounter some different types of virtual interviewing. It may be just video interviewing through Zoom or Skype or Google Hangouts, a platform like that. There are also pre-recorded interviews where you may be asked to record yourself and upload that to a system. So much of virtual interviewing is similar to in-person interviewing. The same things hold in terms of preparation, but in terms of the logistics, there are certain things you want to take into account. Your setting and the setup, what the lighting is like. You want to have light on your face, not coming from behind you. You want to make sure it's quiet and that you have a neutral background. Think about the computer height and angle. How is your sound on your computer? Do you have a backup headset and a charger? Think about with Zoom and many other platforms now, that how the username shows up. That's sort of like wearing your name tag to the office. So think through some of these things before you go into the interview. And then finally, after all this preparation, you get to the interview itself. So again, interviewing is really about the preparation, and then you finally get to the day of the interview. So you always want to show up a little bit early, not too early, maybe just 5 minutes or so, and that goes for being online or in person. Obviously, dress professionally. Have other sounds turned off. So if it's virtual, other things on your computer, noises turned off, phones turned off. Don't move around, don't stand up, don't read from your notes. You can use references. The advantage of virtual interviewing is you can have references to the side on the table. You can have access to other things you might need. So that can be an advantage of virtual interviewing. But above all, whether it's in person or virtual, just stay calm if anything happens. And then after the interview, this is critical, always write a thank you within 12 hours, I would say. Now, because of how fast everything moves, I would use email. Write a thank you note to everyone that interviewed you, and it will really just set you apart. It can be a very short email saying thank you for the opportunity to interview, how much you appreciated it, and sign it off. If it's a position you absolutely care about, if you put a note in the mail, just a thank you card, that really might set you apart even more. And then do yourself the favor of doing a little self-reflection, thinking through how that interview went. Were there questions that surprised you or were challenging? Because every interview you do is practice for the next one. Hopefully it went well and will lead to a job offer or a secondary interview, but at the very least, it's given you practice to go further. So that's mostly covered interviewing, and obviously each situation is very unique and specific depending on the opportunity you're applying for in your personal situation, but that's an overview. As you saw in most of the sections, I mentioned appearance and professional dress, which is a component of interviewing and any other professional interaction. Could be networking and other events that you're involved in. So to go back to that original goal of communicating your value for this opportunity. So you're valuable, you have skills, you have experiences that you can contribute. They've never met you before, so they can't see that value unless you express it. So you're going to be communicating that verbally and through your body language in the interview. They've read it in your resume and your cover letter. But now through your appearance and your confidence, you can express that even more. So dress for success, which means stepping it up a notch, and be yourself, right? There are people that identify in different ways that, the traditional sort of what gets termed business casual or professional may not be what people feel best represents them. So be yourself, but the whole idea is that you don't want to wear anything that is going to distract from what you have to say. So for different terms that you might see, things like casual, business casual, and professional, these are sort of levels of professionalism or, how dressy they are. So if you were invited to a networking event or an interview and it gave you an indication that it could be casual dress, this generally means, no shorts, but you could wear jeans or khakis or, a dress, something casual, but you don't need to wear a suit. Business casual notches it up a little bit. So an outfit that's put together a little bit more, but you don't need to wear a suit and tie. And then finally, professional is really at the top level. This is for a serious interview, a serious networking event, something that is at the most significant level. Most interviews, I would recommend something like a blazer for anyone is a good default. It's neutral. It's a color that doesn't distract. So a blazer and a shirt underneath. If you are someone that tends to fiddle with things, jewelry or watches, be aware of that and maybe don't use those. So think about solid colors that, again, don't make you stand out in a way that you don't want to stand out. You want to set yourself apart because of your experiences and what you have to say. So again, this is just a visual that kind of gives you a description of some of these terms. That said, within it, everyone's going to have some specific ideas of what might work or not. Bottom line, there is never anything wrong with being overdressed. In an interview, you want to be the best dressed person in the room. It shows respect for the situation. And it can kind of give you a sense of confidence. It's almost like a suit of armor. You're going in and you're going into that situation and you have that confidence because you've put on those nice clothes. If you underdress, if you wear something that isn't nice enough, that's, it's going to show a disrespect for the position. So that's an overview of how to interview and professional dress for when you are applying to an opportunity. And we're going to leave it there and go back to the group so I can answer some specific questions.
Thanks so much, Laura. That's amazing. It's such a great overview and really kind of jogs my mind and from an employer's perspective, how I've looked at potential candidates and will continue to in the future. One question I had was in those circumstances where maybe you're overdressed, like, is there a too much?
I would say so I had an example of a young man who was applying to a forestry and it was an in-person interview that included both an interview portion and perhaps going outside and walking around. And I recommended, this is a real interview where the suit you dress for the interview, not the job itself. So obviously the job, he wouldn't be wearing a suit on the job. And he said to me, I know this industry. If I show up in a full suit, they're going to look at me like I don't know what this job is about. So we talked about it. That's about knowing the industry you're in, and agreed that maybe he should show up in nice clothes, but toned down a little bit in a way that allowed him to fit into that certain culture or industry. So that's for each individual person. You might know the context. And I said, wear your nice shoes and bring your boots along. So if you go outside, you can change your shoes. And that goes for anyone. If it's raining outside, wear your rain boots and bring your nice shoes. If you're planning, some interviews will have, perhaps a practical component. If you're a teacher, sometimes they ask you to teach a lesson, or perhaps you have to go walk around. So it's okay to show up in your nicest clothes and then bring something that will allow you to comfortably participate in a tour of the campus or the company grounds. So again, it's going to depend a little bit on each opportunity.
It's so funny that you say that. I actually had that happen to me. I was interviewing for a preschool, and I completely forgot that when they have the interview, they have you sit in on the class, and you can actually, like participate with whatever activity the kids are doing. And I had like a full, you know, full interview outfit, like the suit. Thank God I wore my pants instead of like a dress. But I had like heels on, and he's like, "Are you okay to like go on the playground with your heels?" And so I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm a professional heel walker because I'm so short." So, but I was like, oh, I totally forgot to put my sneakers in my car, like just in case. So yeah, it definitely relate to that.
Yeah, yeah. And just being comfortable in general. So even if you're not going in, even if it's a virtual interview, make sure you've, in the same way that you have prepared everything else about your interview beforehand, you've practiced, go try on those clothes the day before. Make sure you have a tag that's itching you all the way through the interview. Make sure you feel comfortable in those clothes, that they work, because you don't want any surprises, for the most part, that you can control, at least when you get into that interview. Other questions?
More of a comment, I guess. When you mentioned writing the thank you letter after your interview, it's funny, like my mom has always said to do that after an interview. I thought she was just like being extra. I didn't know that that was like a good, like that the companies like actually look at that. So I was like, oh, okay, all right. She knew what she was talking about. So
Well, think about it. It's not just the company, it's the person.
mhm.
You're sending it to an individual, which lets them know that you're thinking of them as a person. And always, whether it's the interview, whether it's, again, this whole component of your application, your resume, your cover letter, be thinking about all of this from their perspective. If you're ever uncertain about, what do I want to add, what are they looking for, put yourself in the employer's shoes. So now, in terms of a thank you letter, how would you feel if you got a thank you note? You would feel pretty recognized and appreciated, and that's a pretty great feeling. Now, if you get thank you notes from 3 different candidates and you don't get one from that 4th person, that 4th person maybe isn't looking quite as good. So it's a good practice to get into.
I would think, especially if they're interviewing 15, 20 people, and the decisions aren't being made right after an interview, but maybe in the following week, and your letter comes in, it just brings you to top of mind, and I guess to top of the pile also.
It really does. Anything you can do to make yourself more of a person, more, and what I mean by that is, again, so much, they've never met you before. So you are coming in as a resume, as a cover letter, along with many other people. And then obviously now they've met you in that interview. But the more you can turn yourself into that real person by sending a thank you note, by giving them something personal to attach to your name, anything else, it really does just, put you in their mind as, oh, we can see you as a candidate and not just another name in the pile.
Laura, are there any deal breakers that you feel like are the absolute no-nos?
I have asked this. I often bring in alumni. We do mock interviews or people in HR. That one about when they get to the question and they ask you, do you have any questions? I have heard so many times from interviewers, when people don't ask them questions back or don't have questions prepared, it just really says to them, you know what, you don't care about it, right? You haven't, if you want to work there, why haven't you taken the time to think through it? and have some questions ready. So that's definitely one. What else do I think is really not great? Again, I think it mostly comes down to that aspect of respect. The question at the beginning that they are most likely to ask you is, why do you want to work here? Why do you want this position? So they really want to know that you're not just applying to any job. They want to know why you're applying to their company or their organization in particular. So if you kind of come in, or a candidate comes in and doesn't know anything about the organization, hasn't looked at the mission, hasn't looked at the values, and just, isn't dressed appropriately, hasn't taken the time, and it's pretty clear, that is kind of a deal breaker. Whereas someone who maybe looks nervous or, is a little anxious, but clearly has thought through why they want to work there, has done a little research about what that company is about, that's a great candidate. So those are two different situations.
And are there any, I think back to interviews that I participated in and practicing, that there seem to always be some standard questions of what's your greatest strength? What do you feel is your greatest weakness? What's a project or an involvement that you're really proud of?
Yes.
Are there others that you feel like today are commonplace and, might be questions that people typically could expect?
Yeah, I think those will always continue, or well, who knows always, but still are very common. So being prepared for, again, those sort of behavioral type questions, what has been a challenge? I think one that everyone in today's day and age should be thinking about is whether it's COVID or the ongoing impact of COVID, which could mean a lot of different things, but the world we're living in virtually. So thinking about examples of how you deal with unpredictable situations, how you adapt to new situations, your creativity, your technological ability. So anything you can talk about in terms of your awareness of our current context is really important. So even if they don't ask you that question, if you can address that ahead of time, I think that really sets you apart. So you might say something like, not only, am I interested in being a classroom teacher or an engineer, but, I'm thinking about how I can be great at that job in today's world, right? And some challenges I anticipate are XYZ, or, here are the skills I would bring to it, because in today's world, it's a different job than it might have been 5 years ago. So that's one that I think has changed. I think, just looking at the bigger, not only the, something like the pandemic, but also thinking about our wider world culture issues that surround us, and thinking about that context and any sort of awareness you can bring from that. Are questions I think you might questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, community engagement, technology. I think those are all likely to be questions that might be touched on.
Great. My phone just ringing reminded me of probably should turn your phone off going into the interview. Are there times when it's appropriate, like if you are applying for, social media or communications, or that you're wanting to pull up examples, or are there inappropriate times when maybe you're engaging in conversation and saying, oh, look at these photos? Any advice on the balance of appropriateness and inappropriateness of phone in interview?
I would say if you are wanting an interviewer to see, your, maybe you have a portfolio of work or a blog or an Instagram feed or something like that, that's probably something you should have linked to ahead of time. So for example, on your resume, maybe you link to your portfolio, or on your LinkedIn page, maybe you have a lot of your media. So during an interview, I don't think it is the time to be pulling up anything on your phone and showing them. That's something that they may have seen ahead of time, or you could say, you know, go look at it later. It's just, I would say that's not the time. I encourage you in all aspects of everything I'm talking about, get all sorts of opinions, right? I'm talking about best practices that we talk about here in our office, but we are constantly trying to inform ourselves. And it's great to get perspectives from other people as well. So, you know, I always try and go to the experts, and that might be someone who is going straight into a career in media and design, and they may have a different perspective on that. But I would say in general, you know, not the time to pull out your phone.
Yeah, I would, as an employer, be concerned, and it makes me wonder if like not even bringing your phone in your pocket, or, you know, it seems like there's such a commonplace of people so hooked on screen time, and you know, it just habitually pulling out their phone to check it or to look at it, and just the slightest thing that could distract your attention from the conversation at hand. That, you know, if you're that type of person, to really know that you have that habit and it may be undesirable, and to maybe even leave your phone at home or completely turn the power off before you go in.
Yeah, I would, the only reason I've shifted a little bit on maybe allowing or saying people might want to bring it in is the fact that some people schedule things on their calendar on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
In general, I would say if you can, leave it in outside, leave it in the other room, definitely turn off the power. However, it can be something useful if, you know, they want to schedule a follow-up or something. I can understand why some people might want that. Same time, paper, pencil, you can write something down and schedule it later. So.
Absolutely.
Other questions?
Stay awake.
It's hard on the virtual interviewing in particular to have a sense of whether you're actually making eye contact or not. You know, even as with that presentation, I actually couldn't see any of you. So it's likely that if it was recording me, I wasn't looking out at the audience because I didn't have a sense of who to look at. When you're in an interview, you might have multiple people interviewing you. It might just be one. You need to practice ahead of time, maybe with someone else, to get a sense of, oh, am I making eye contact or am I looking off to the side? Because an interviewer isn't going to say to you, oh, you're looking off to the side the whole time, but it makes it a little uncomfortable. So the more you can think about that ahead of time, it really does make a difference.
That is a tricky dynamic of like, eye contact now equates to looking at the camera, not looking at the person's face on the screen.
Something else to realize though, and I didn't talk about it in the virtual interviewing, is that many of your interviews may also be phone interviews, especially initial interviews. And that can actually be, there are pros and cons to it. The upside is that sometimes and I think it's actually been shown with the video, as we just talked about, if you're not sure where to look at, or the double stimulation of visual cues and audio can actually be distracting. So only having the audio can be good. And you don't have that opportunity to perhaps present yourself and use your body language in a really strong way. But just be aware that many of your initial interviews might be by phone, in which case you really need to make an effort to speak clearly, enunciate, use your voice to be expressive. If anyone's taken acting lessons, which I think would be a great thing to do, you know, how do you express yourself in a way that people can really hear that through your voice?
You had touched on the pre-recorded interviews.
Mhm.
I feel like that would be like so hard to, like, I don't know. My anxiety would just be like so high because there's no one to, like,
Yeah.
you can't read the room basically, you're just basically talking to yourself and trying to impress yourself and then send it out. So what's like what's my question? What's the best way to do that if you did have to do a pre-recorded interview?
Mhm. You get a couple times, I think, to like you can go practice on your own. I think for both those and any interview, again, the more practice you can do, the better. If you can find someone to do a mock interview with, if, ask a friend, ask family, ask, email me. I'm happy to do one with you. And then for those in particular, try video taping yourself. And actually, this is good for any interview. It is incredibly uncomfortable. I can't think of anyone that enjoys watching themselves on screen. If you can remain objective though, and just look at it as if it were someone else, you will get a sense of, oh, okay, this is what maybe I want to shift or how I want to say things. And it might just get a little more comfortable and reduce some of that anxiety. And you could practice recording on your own. And then when you actually have to do one of those pre-recorded ones, you'd be ready to do it. So I haven't seen, you just mentioned teaching, so I'm guessing you might be in the field of education. Is that correct?
Who, me?
Yeah, I know you're working with the Lifestyle Foundation, but are you in the field of education?
I was. Right now I just tutor, but yeah, I've been teaching all my life.
So I haven't seen that type of interview as much in some fields. I haven't seen it in the education field much. That said, who knows what the future will bring.
Yeah, hopefully they just keep it virtual. I can do virtual interviews, because I like to, like I said, read the room. Like, I can see what, I guess it's easier to, like, you feed off of each other kind of when you're talking face to face. So it's just a lot easier to do it that way.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
And just on the topic of virtual interviews, pros and cons of virtual background versus no virtual background?
I'm going to go back to this piece about not distracting from what you have to say. So the virtual backgrounds have, some of them have improved a lot. I saw one the other day where I didn't realize it was a virtual background until I think the second time I'd met with this woman. And there are others that I find to be just distracting. The more, if at all possible, if you can just find a neutral background somewhere, great. I would say go for neutral background if at all possible. There's enough still with the, Brian, I'm gonna look, oh, he just disappeared. Even if some of the virtual backgrounds are pretty good, it can still be distracting if you move and your hand disappears, or there's fuzziness around you. So, and there's often, if you go, well, I know many of us are limited by our the surroundings we have available, but do the best you can. And you can always say it's okay to say something in an interview. We are human. It's a professional situation. They are not your friends. And at the same time, people are human and we're understanding of the world we're living in. So if you need to say to someone, I'm using a virtual background right now, I hope that's, okay, something like that. It's okay to let people know what you're doing and sort of have an awareness about that, rather than just, doing something and not informing people as to why it's there. That would be my take on it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And Brian, if you have a different opinion on any of this as someone who has employed people or been employed, feel free to jump in at any point.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything you've been saying. And some of these questions, I think about not only as an applicant or anyone watching this video that might, gain knowledge from this in interviewing, but also as an employer. And, for me to gauge these things. And I think one thing, that I'm always conscious about is the level of someone's, I don't know if it's a real word, talkability. And it almost seems like the more someone talks, the more suspicious I might be that they're more of a talker and not a doer. And so I think the importance of having concise answers with, concentrated focus to them is really important. And although I think nervousness can lead to, being overly verbose, that, being able to curtail your answers and not go on and on is important as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one is that some of us just like to talk, you're outgoing or you're energetic. Some of it is we often talk when we're nervous, and we're often afraid of silence, right? Or we get uncomfortable with it. So be okay with slowing down, and we forget to listen too. And maybe out of anxiety, we get so stuck on that script or giving the right answer that you actually in the interview don't listen to what they're asking them. So be confident that they're going to guide the interview. They want to know what you have to say, so they have set questions. So go in, listen, and listen to, in the same way that you're having a conversation with someone else. Listen to the question and then tell your story, but it's okay to stop. And you can always say, did I answer your question? And so you can always add more. You can always expand on things, but, be okay with stopping, thinking, listening to what they are asking you. So definitely not rambling, and always coming back to this opportunity. Is what you're saying relevant to the opportunity you're applying for?
I felt like your mention of, a comfortable silence, that if there is a question that you're not really sure of what your answer is, to be able to take that moment to just think and pause while you consider what your response is, as opposed to just jumping right into kind of trying to fake your way through it. Well, this is great. I don't know if there's any more questions, but we're at our hour mark, and I want to thank you again so much, Laura, that this really is so helpful and has been a great resource as part of this series, because I think those elements of, the interpersonal interaction in seeking work is a huge part of the decision-making process for employers.
Yeah, and I would just encourage everyone to remember that a big piece of this, as I said, is sort of recognizing your value. Obviously, you need to communicate it, but it does start with that recognition of your value, and knowing that doesn't have to just come from work experiences or, something that was a paid job. Think through your entire breadth of experience that you've had in your life, right? There was a reason they invited you into this interview. So go in, be confident, your story, and share that with them. So just know that your value comes from all these different experiences you've had. So just think through those and then be able to express them confidently. And you're going to do great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and thank you to St. Michael's College and the Career Education Center. And also want to give a quick shout out to our supporter, Nestle Health Sciences, in supporting the STROLO-University this semester. And just really grateful to have yet another piece of education for our audience.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me here. And I know Tim Birmingham is looking forward to being here next week.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you again. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Great. Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.